What's up, everybody, and welcome to our extended E3 coverage, Day 1. Horizon Zero Dawn, one of the flagship titles, PlayStation 4, developed by Guerrilla Games, coming off the back of the Killzone series, finally getting onto a new IP.
You wouldn't think they worked on Killzone by looking at Horizon, by the way.
It's a stark departure.
About the only thing I can see in common with Horizon and the Killzone series is that some of the plating on the robot dinosaurs looks like Killzone armor, you know what I mean? Or
and of course, the graphical fidelity is still
ships.
there as well.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, a Guerrilla Games signature.
But yeah, no, a stark departure, but I think a welcome one that a lot of us would agree with. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So you saw an extended look and gameplay, or you got to play as well?
Yeah, both. I saw an extended look of the gameplay demo from the presser. So a little bit front loaded at the beginning with some town settlement exploration that led into the quest where she ultimately faced against the Corruptor. And then at the end of that demo, I got to go hands-on with myself in just kind of a smallish open-world area with a few sort of miscellaneous objectives, just kind of test my mettle and get used to the controls.
But are there NPCs that you get to interact with?
There sure are, and we saw how that goes. So imagine, if you will, a little indie game, a little underground title by the name of The Witcher.
A small one.
The Witcher? Am I saying that right?
The
Witness is what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Hunt of the Wild.
Yeah.
I bring up The Witcher because it's an easy comparison to make just to help our viewers visualize what Horizon looks and feels like, in the sense that Aloy, our main character, our main heroine, enters this town sort of like the traveling wanderer that Geralt is, Geralt of Rivia in The Witcher when he enters towns. There is a sense of her being an outcast and someone who doesn't belong there. And we had John Gonzalez, the writer of the game, there in the room to talk to us about the vision for Aloy as a character. She is indeed an outcast, and a story trailer we were treated to positioned her as someone who does not subscribe to the superstitions and speculations and religions that drive the tribes of the game.
Yeah.
She's pragmatic. She's inquisitive. And she wants to know how and why things are the way they are, how these robots work. When they become corrupted, she doesn't... when they become corrupted and the village elder tells her, we must pray to the goddess that the corruption is cleansed, she says, no, screw that. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to kill these things, research the metallic parts that they're composed of, and figure out the answer. So in that way, she's a bit of a conduit for the player who similarly will be stepping into this world without any of the context of the tribes that inhabit it, and we'll be there figuring things out for ourselves, just the way she is. So I thought that was an effective way. But so we did the demo that I watched, the gameplay section that I viewed, did start with her entering a settlement called Mother's Crown. Because of the tribal nature of these things, it bears some resemblance to high fantasy. So you have kind of sort of tall wood log walls, that are spiked at the top. There's a main gate to the town that only opens for people they recognize. And we had just returned from completing a quest that we didn't see, and she's going to go turn in the quest. So we saw a little bit of extra dialogue with the NPC who had initially given her the quest, a village priestess of some kind. There were dialogue options there, like we saw in the E3 presser. We had the option to kind of push the elder's buttons a little bit when she started talking about the goddess and how the corruption is a blight and we must pray for it to be cleansed. And she goes, no, I'm going to screw that. I'm going to go out there and figure out what's going on. So it's cool and a refreshing attitude to see.
Yeah, that's perfect conduit, I think, to carry the story and carry that sense of exploration. And
definitely.
Yeah.
We stopped at a merchant, so we got a sense of what the shopping window looks like and what the exchange of goods kind of feels like.
Do they have her straight up weapons available, or do they have parts?
We purchased 2 weapons and got a look at the armor that particular guy was selling. So definitely a lot of RPG flavor.
So the weapons are accessible to the village? I mean, are there other people in the village that have the same weapons that she uses, or are they unique to her from what you could see?
I think we can assume that there are other hunters in the world who
clearly she was taught by somebody how to use
it seems that there's a culture of adventurers and braves who go out and either fetch materials and resources from the dinosaurs or just simply hunt them for sport or for glory and whatever. With the shards, the currency that were in our inventory for the demo, they purchased 2 weapons, and then they browsed the armor a little bit. What's cool about the armor is that it's less, at least this is my perception of it, and they seem to confirm as much when I asked about it afterward. It's less of the vertical progression in traditional RPGs that just causes number bloat over the course of a game. Like
Sure.
like every town you go to, it's just better shit, and then you spend your money on it. This was more like, and I noted the resistances here. The piece of armor that this merchant was selling had plus 10% projectile resistance, plus 10% corruption resistance, and minus 5% freeze resistance. So there's pros and cons to simply even wearing that piece of armor.
Would be like a Dark Souls or Bloodborne.
Yeah, like you're literally trading things because of the flavor of the area in which you're at, the enemies that you'll soon be facing, and they did say that the weapons and armor are region-based. So there's flavor to them that depends on where you're at in the world. It won't necessarily just be... I'm sure there will be upgrades, but...
So like in the collector's editions where they have the different types of costumes available, those would be region-specific most likely from what they have. Because they're they're aesthetically very different, and then those would also have different... They would have different attributes given to them.
They're called outfits for some reason, not armor, but so the outfits are region-specific.
Because that was one of my biggest things when they first announced the collectors. I was like, is this just a skin that you're buying?
No, it probably is functional armor with something going on. The weapons, too, are customizable in some fashion. So weapons have empty sockets that can be slotted with robot parts to add probably, percent perks just the same way.
So the materia system, pretty much.
Yeah, you can add Cure 3, Cure 2. No, just things that you presumably would, increase perhaps the lightning power of a weapon or the firepower of a weapon. You can amplify that with sockets.
Sure.
In the shop window, we also see, what ammo types work with that weapon. It's just kind of shown at a glance. Like this uses concussion arrows and, hard penetrating arrows. The next weapon might use fire arrows, ice arrows, and lightning arrows. And so every weapon has its flavor. You'll have to kind of keep an eye on that and think about the enemies you'll be facing in the kind of
that's like we
vicinity.
saw in the Corruptor where they picked fire to go after that.
Yeah, definitely. So we spend some time in the town, we get a sense of that flavor, and then we head out into the world. From there, the demo proceeds with what we saw in the E3 presser, more or less. She moves closer to this settlement that's corrupted. In the case of the story context here, we don't know what the corruptor boss is or why it's corrupting other machines. We're specifically told by Guerrilla that a lot of machines out in the world are not innately hostile, and a lot of them will run from you. You encounter the ones that kind of look like stags. They get frightened in the same way that real world stags would. But then this corruptor in the demo is twisting that by literally injecting possibly some kind of menacing code into them. Yeah. Aggression. It's something wacky, right? Something not pleasant. An interesting note here. This is not a question of mine. It was another writer in the demo with me, but he noted some influences from Princess Mononoke. Okay. And he asked if that was intentional. I wasn't expecting Guerrilla to say yes. They overtly have elements of the game as an homage to Studio Ghibli films, particularly Princess Mononoke and Nausicaa. And Mononoke, as I thought about it more, I'm like, yeah, totally, these creatures of the wild becoming corrupted and twisted and blackened and, obviously the female.
Like warrior princess type.
Yeah, the warrior princess who can communicate with the mechanical nature, tame the beasts. There is literally like any enemy you attack and defeat in the world. If presuming they have some health left and haven't just blown up, you can hack that enemy to either become your mount or fight for you.
Yeah, as we saw in the trailer.
And they'll take action against your aggressors because of the fact that you've hacked them. So we get the gameplay flavor. We see a little bit of hacking.
What would you equate it to? Say the gameplay for actually like the moment-to-moment moving around and stuff. Does it feel reminiscent of anything?
I would return to the Witcher example a little bit, if only because it feels the third-person exploration bears some similarities with where the camera's at and how it seems to move. Animation, when I played it, it wasn't an egregious example, but it does kind of have that animation lock where there's I would call it just short of being over animated, but it is like a kind of thing where everything is kind of painstakingly done, and so you can't necessarily turn on a dime. There's some weight behind it.
Yeah, we see that with a lot of titles.
But you always have a melee option available to you. Her default kind of lightning powered cane / stave is sort of her light attack and heavy attack if something is at close range. But then if anything's further than that, you're going to want to perhaps use your focus power to analyze it and see its weak points. decide what element it's weak to, see if you have that weapon in your inventory, or pull out, say, the rope caster if the enemy's low on health and you want to like tie it down and hack it or something like that.
Do you have any word on human-to-human combat?
None.
That is an interesting question.
Although the story trailer did hint toward that. I mean, it really positioned her as an outcast that a lot of other humans are not fond of for some reason. Her mother has some role to play in that. They specifically mention, or maybe it's her in that trailer, she asks like what of my mother, or your mother wanted more for you, kind of a thing, which makes me think that her mother is important to her position as an outcast.
Yeah, right.
And I think her quest is driven by a lot of questions. Certainly, what's the nature of these machines? Why is this corruption spreading? But also, I think literally, she just does not know who she is or where she comes from, or maybe why she was left with a tribe, why she is who she is, and she can't seem to get along with anybody.
Any negatives you saw? It's good because, like, for me, the first thing initially, which I don't think is really a negative anymore, but was our first impressions of this last year was how gorgeous it looked.
Right.
And then in the first story trailer that came out a little while ago, and then what we saw at the show, facial animations are pretty rough compared to what's other things out there now. But since it seems to be on scale, literally be on scale with something like The Witcher, that makes a lot more sense.
It does. I would agree that I think it visually it strikes me as less impressive than when we first saw it. I think it's very possible that our first slice of action and gameplay was probably had a lot of attention put into it to prepare it for prime time, and now we're getting more into like development where there's rough edges on things. I think in terms of gameplay, when I actually did get to sit down and get my hands on it, it helps. I'll just say this: it helps that I had seen so much of the game already, because I would have been completely clueless and just way in over my head to be dropped in that world. She had so many things in her weapon wheel, like so many tools. Enemies were really giving me a tough time in certain respects. I had miscellaneous objectives like tie a broadhead enemy down to the ground and loot it, or knock a crate off of the shell walkers, which you saw in the trailer. She knocks that kind of big chest thing off of him. It was, take down a few of these enemy types. And, like, these objectives, even knowing who the enemies were, knowing that I had the tools in my thing, were still, like, legitimately kind of hard to achieve. Like, you need to be fairly accurate with your bow shots to even hit the weak spots that you're aiming at. There's even a slow motion tool to occasionally help you, like a focus mode. And even there, I was still somewhat regularly missing shots. I mean, these things move really quickly, even when time is slowed a little bit. So I guess I don't want to say that it's a thing of difficulty balance, but I did notice that, like, if I would hit an enemy with a basic arrow or a fire arrow just anywhere on its body, I might see 5 damage, 6 damage, and then it'd be 100 for hitting any of its weak points. So what that tells me is that combat in the game it's really going to play to your strengths if you put in the time and patience to, like, master these creatures, really understand all the different weak points. I imagine there will be weak points and vulnerabilities that the game doesn't make readily apparent. Like, you might say, cool, that's a weak point, this vat of energy or this vat of fuel. But after playing the game for a dozen hours, you might discover that by the way, the underside of the stomach is also a weak point. They just didn't tell you that. But you're definitely going to have to exploit those, or you're just screwed. I mean, the enemies fight back. They're somewhat vicious. You can heal yourself by collecting basically like plants, ingredients in the open world. You can pool those up and then occasionally refill your health bar by consuming that herb pouch, basically.
The green herb, of course.
But even then, I didn't feel like it ever, like, I probably wasn't going out of my way to collect those things, but it still wasn't healing me, like, to instant. It wasn't just like a Dark Souls instant flask to, like, make up for your mistakes. If you make mistakes, you're gonna have a hard time, basically. It seems like a difficult game. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call that a problem. I think it just was a little overwhelming. So the way that these things are laid out, the way the game introduces you to mechanics and concepts, is going to be critical for how enjoyable of an experience it is.
So I guess overall, highly positive. Some little questionable things, but I guess we're still 7 months out, 6 months out from the.
Yeah, I just have questions. I think the game's coming very far along. I'm intrigued by the story considerably. It's definitely an RPG. Like that, more than anything is what I take away from it, is that I didn't consider it to be one going in. It looked so much more like action adventure, like RPG light. But no, this is straight up like, I don't know if I've seen a more textbook definition of the hybrid of RPG and action, because it truly has strong elements of both, which is kind of refreshing.
Yeah, I like that. It's definitely it. Yeah. Okay, well, sir, that was our impressions, or rather Carl's impressions of Horizon Zero Dawn. Gameplay as well, jeez. Impressive stuff. So stay tuned to PSU for this whole week for E3. Twitter, the website itself, PS YouTube, Periscope, Snapchat, it's everywhere. Digital age. And we'll talk to you next time. So, till next.
Thanks, guys.